Mozambique. The region of Cabo Delgado, north of the country, has been experiencing attacks by the insurgents. Last month, dozens were killed when militants attacked a hotel in Palma. Many people have fled the coastal town for safety. Sophie Mukwena reports.
The international community is calling for decisive action to end the fighting. Countries such as the United States of America, France, Italy, and Portugal say they are willing to help Mozambique's government. The AU has, however, warned against this move, saying SADC and AU must take a lead. The SADC Troika this week is expected to come up with a resolution that will lead to an action that will be taken by the regional body. Sophie Mugwen, SABC News.
Thousands of people in Mozambique's northern province of Cabo Delgado are desperately searching for safety. The situation in the area remains volatile after armed groups attacked Palma district last month. South Africa's Defense Department says the more than 50 South Africans who were reported missing have now been accounted for. Let's get the latest on the humanitarian situation in Mozambique. We are joined via Teams by James Matthews, who is the International Committee of the Red Cross Deputy Head in Mozambique. Good afternoon to you and welcome.
Good afternoon.
All right, just paint us a picture about things and how they stand currently in as far as the number of people who need aid in Mozambique.
Thank you. So I think one of the things to highlight in the ongoing situation in northern Mozambique is the difficulty of obtaining information. Telecommunications with Palma are still currently cut. And ourselves, the International Committee of the Red Cross, we don't have a team in the Palma area at the moment. So that volatility is a clear element of the situation as it is at the moment. What we do know, though, is that thousands of people have been moving away, fleeing the fighting. And we've seen, according to UN numbers, those thousands arriving in different places, fleeing south to Pemba city and inland to Nangade, to Mueda and to Montepuez. And I think one of the big elements that the humanitarian community is still looking at is the disparity between the number of people who've made it to these places and the number of people who are still seeking places of refuge after this recent uptick in violence in the north of Cabo Delgado.
So how are you able to assist with relief measures when you have been cut off through the communication infrastructure?
So at the moment, what we're doing is preparing to help people who've been displaced and people who are sick and wounded and who are arriving in places where they can seek refuge. So up to now, the International Committee of the Red Cross, we've been involved alongside the Mozambican Red Cross with triage of people arriving in Pemba city, help with transfer of the sick and wounded to the hospital in Pemba. And we've also been able to support medical facilities in the city of Pemba with infusion and dressing kits that for the treatment of people who've been wounded. In the medium term, we're also making preparations to help displaced populations with essential household items once they've arrived and have settled. And then we're also registering people who are unaccounted for. Our teams in Pemba are doing that already and providing services to help facilitate the re-establishment of family contact. So people who have fled and who have lost contact with their families and loved ones, and that includes the provision of free phone calls so that they can try and trace their families and be reunited. And we're clearly following the situation and coordinating with other humanitarian actors, and authorities, and particularly the health authorities.
So how safe are these officials who are trying to render humanitarian aid and their lives on harm's way when it comes to them navigating all the areas where they're trying to search and rescue some people who may be desperate?
So there are a number of elements that need to be in place for humanitarian response. We need information on what the current situation is. We then need to do an assessment of humanitarian needs and what people displaced, civilians displaced by this round of violence need at the moment. And then also we need security conditions for our teams to be able to operate in safety. And as I say, the area around Palma at the moment is still highly volatile and difficult at the moment for operations to take place there. But our teams in Pemba are able to target displaced people who are actually arriving in these safer havens.
What have you observed about the threat of insurgents there? Are they visible, or is it a question of them appearing by surprise? Is it the kind of like make noise in the east and attacking the west kind of scenario?
In terms of the evolution of events as a humanitarian organization, it isn't our role to publicly comment on the political aspects or the military aspects of the ongoing situation, but we are deeply concerned about the humanitarian consequences of this uptick in violence, and particularly important for us that call on all sides to enable us to access with humanitarian aid people who've been caught up in this most recent round of fighting. And from the numbers that have arrived, we know that this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of the number of people who have fled the area of Palma. It's a city of a population of around 75,000. That was already increased by people who had already been displaced by the conflict, and now many of those have had to flee again. So our concern is really for those who have been left behind, who are still unaccounted for, and who in all likelihood will be expected to be arriving in the different places where they have fled to safety in the coming days.
All right. Thank you so much for making time so much to talk about regarding this situation, especially now that you're not able to comment on some of the aspects regarding your operations there due to security concerns. One is taking heed of the fact that sometimes during insurgency, you would have a journalist kidnapped. You may have a humanitarian worker kidnapped as well. And the issue of safety around that, if you're not able to comment, really makes work difficult for us as journalists to try and enlighten people at home, because some people here in South Africa have relatives there and they would like to really understand the situation contextually as to what it means for their family members.
No, indeed, and fully understand that side. But in terms of direct contact, as I mentioned at the beginning, our teams are not and haven't been involved or operating around the area of Palma. Our teams are based in Pemba, and from before this recent upsurge in violence, we're operating in a number of areas, but not as far north as Palma. So in that sense, a direct confirmation of events witnessed firsthand from our teams. All we're able to do is comment on the work we're doing in Pemba and receiving the people who've been displaced. But of course, we're hugely concerned about those humanitarian consequences, and that include all civilians who were caught up in this recent surge of violence.
All right. Thank you so much for making time to speak to us. We are speaking here to the James Matthews, who is International Committee member of the Red Cross. He's a deputy head there in Mozambique, speaking to us about the humanitarian crisis in that area. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.